All time zones today. Welcome to the Georgette Heyer Unconference, a century spent having a ball, which is celebrating the publication of Georgette Heyer, History and Historical Fiction, a volume of essays published today by UCL Press, edited by Dr. Samantha Rayner and Professor Kim Wilkins, with whom I, Jax Thomas, a self-confessed Heyer hobbyist, am delighted to be a co-chair of this Unconference. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our guests today to discuss Heyer, the Nonesuch of her time and the original influencer. As the majority of us are based here in the UK, I think it is surely polite to welcome our international speaker first. Lois McMaster Bujold joins us from Minnesota and is the award-winning SF and fantasy author of Sharing Knife and World of the Five Gods, among other series. She was named a Grand Master by the SF Writers of America in 2020, and we are honoured to have you here today with us, Lois.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're most welcome. Harriet Evans worked on the inside of the book industry as a publisher for many years, but in the end, her love of writing won out over her publishing career, and she enjoys being lucky enough to focus on her writing as a full-time novelist. Harriet is the author of 11 novels, which have all been bestsellers, including A Place for Us, Going Home, and Love Always. Hello, Harriet.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you here with us. Cathy Rentzenbrink, very well known in the bookselling and publishing arena, is the author of The Last Act of Love, A Manual for Heartache, and Dear Reader. Her first novel is called Everyone is Still Alive and will be out in July. Cathy, I believe you're speaking to us from Cornwall, where you live. Lucky you, better than lockdown London.
Yeah, no, it is very nice to be down here. It is pouring with rain at the moment.
Well, that makes us feel marginally better.
I'm in Regency Bath and it's pouring with rain as well, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And now to Katie Fforde, who loves being a writer. To her, there isn't a more satisfying and pleasing thing to do. She particularly enjoys writing about falling in, as she believes, writing about love, as she believes that falling in love is the best thing in the world, and she wants all her characters to experience it and her readers to share their stories. That certainly seems to be the case, given that your books have sold over 3.4 million copies worldwide, Katie.
Gosh, have they really?
Yes. So happy publication week to you. I understand you have a new novel out. And hello to you, and you're residing in the Cotswolds.
I am, where it's actually not raining, although it has been raining, but it isn't raining now.
Well, we are in the UK, so it's bound to at some point. So what a pleasure it is to chair this session, during which I anticipate my job simply be to ensure that we don't run away with time, given how informed and passionate, and I understand that you all love Georgette Heyer. So let's start, if I may, with you, Harriet, by posing the question that I'll ask everyone in turn, but in a succinct, old school, 140 character Twitter style answer. When did you discover Georgette Heyer, and which is your favourite novel?
My mum had them all and was a huge fan and still is. And I have two joint favourites. I'm really sorry. And they are Venetia and Devil's Cub, because both the hero and the heroine are the right level of inexperienced and experienced, and you know, they're my two favourites. I couldn't choose between them, like my children.
I think that's fair enough. I think it's quite hard to choose your favourite Heyer novel as well. Yes. Lois, how about you?
Oh, I stumbled across Heyer quite randomly in a remainder bookshop in Columbus, Ohio, where I lived in around 1970, and bought a couple of particularly for the covers, because they intrigued me, and I still have them.
Oh, now which editions were those? Oh, fantastic.
From the 1960s, 1967, and then I proceeded to look her up in my local libraries and fell across the rest of her oeuvre.
And the favourites? The favourite?
Probably Cotillion, although it works best if you've read enough of Heyer to know how she's working against her own type in that one. But Cotillion is perennial. It's wonderful.
Yeah, now you've mentioned it, that could be a favourite as well. Katie. It's terrible.
That's true.
How did you discover Heyer? Was it your mum?
I was quite young. No, my mother was a bit snooty about hair, I have to say, but somebody left a copy of Friday's Child at our house. And honestly, I was very young and I didn't understand all the words, but I was still swept away by the story. But my favourite is the next one I read, which is The Grand Sophie. Although hearing other people's favourites, I always only think, oh yes, no, that's my favourite. I'm very fond of The Talisman Ring as well, both of which are very funny. And that's, you know, that's part of her, I think, her humour.
Yes.
Sorry, that's my husband coming out.
Yes. Sorry, I got momentarily diverted because yes, as soon as anyone's mentioning the next Heyer novel, I'm thinking, oh, hang on, they're all sliding around in terms of priority in my head. So, Cathy, what about you? How did you discover her to start off?
Oh, yeah, my mum, I don't think read her, or still doesn't, still doesn't rate, still isn't interested. A good old Snaith Library, I think, and then which I still like doing, sort of hunting for them in charity shops. I like all those old Pan editions. I could go along with anybody's favourite. I don't really have, I mean, it's difficult. I would just pick a different favourite on a different day. There's probably about maybe 12 or 14 that I think are top flight. Because they're not all, but for the purposes of this, I have picked on Frederica.
Oh, yeah. No.
My cousin bought me this. He found it in a car boot sale.
I know that edition.
Same edition, yeah.
I like the older heroines. So if I probably have a favourite, it's the older, sort of slightly, woman of the world heroines would probably be my favourite subcategory. But of course, one of the reasons why we're so fascinating is that you could just endlessly have this conversation and come to a different conclusion every time.
Yes, I've come to the conclusion it's the last one anyone mentioned because I like them all. So, and she hasn't been out of print, I understand, for the last century. So the absolutely enduring sort of value of Heyer. So then that brings me on to the respected academic Catherine Sutherland writes in Heyer, History and Historical Fiction, which we're celebrating here through this conference, referring to the historical novel, escapism as a response and a protest within history. And so I'm sort of somewhat intrigued because just at the moment, as a scary pandemic wages war on the world, how apposite is that quote? And is escapism synonymous with a less literary type of work?
I would say it is probably. I think escapism probably isn't literary, but I don't care. I want it. I write it and I read it, because I do want to escape from the current pandemic, and a book is a perfect safe place. And so I'm unashamedly an escapist.
Anybody else want to dive in there?
I work in a genre that, is schizophrenic about whether it's escapist or engaged with current events, and it can go either way. I read for escape. I read Heyer for escape, certainly. And I read comedy. I notice when I read that the ones I enjoy are the comedies, not the romantic melodramas. And Georgette Heyer is reliably comic. She also has world building, which we can get into in a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's
the other two. Yeah.
Well, I think it's what people mean when they say escapism, because what they quite often mean is something patronising. And the most escapist book I ever read was Atonement, and I read it on holiday, and I spent all day by the pool. And that was total escapism. I left the world I was in. I was completely absorbed by it. But no one calls that an escapist novel. They call it nominated, What people quite often mean when they say escapism is lesser fiction, and that quite often is applied to fiction by women. And that when I was about 25, I remember reading a Georgette Heyer and picking up someone's Evening Standard on the tube, and the night before there'd been a ceremony at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich to honour Patrick O'Brien, and I've tried to read Patrick O'Brien so many times and I can't get past the first chapter. And Georgette Heyer is writing exactly the same time, exactly the same part of a woman's world, and yet who is holding a conference for her at the Bath Assembly Rooms? I'm going to do that next year. But like Malcolm Rifkin had been, the list of guests, it was an incredibly kind of, British establishment thing. And that for me, Patrick O'Brien is escapism to millions of people. Not to do him down, millions of people enjoy him, but it's the use of the word, like airport novel. You know, loads of people are sold in airports, but what you mean when you say airport novel is something that's got gold foil on it. I like having gold foil. I like being a top 10 bestseller, but most of all, I want my books to be good. And her books were really good. I'll shut up now because I could go on.
I think a better term than airport novel might be hospice novel. Anchor it a little more appropriately where I see my readers, at least.
What about you, Cathy? What's escapism for you, and what's escapism?
Well, I mean, I basically agree with everything that everyone else has said. I mean, Heyer herself said something like, I'm sure my books are terrible nonsense, but I think I'd quite like to read one if I was sitting in an air raid shelter recovering from flu, which I think is, I mean, you know, she was writing some of them in the Second World War. She would have been literally sitting in an air raid shelter and knowing what it means to sit in an air raid shelter. So I never feel, I'm very pro, I think a big function of books is to escape, and sort of what's wrong with that. I also completely agree with Harry that often it just depends what gender the writer is. So and I also agree with Lois, what really I love about Heyer is that they're funny. So I'm less interested in them I'm less interested in the romance plot than I think they're social comedies, and they're very funny. So my comparison when I'm out there trying to get people to read her is, it's P.G. Wodehouse with a Regency, a really well-researched Regency setting. And of course, because again, like Patrick O'Brian, who I agree, never been able to get on with, but people don't talk about P.G. Wodehouse with the slight sneer that you might get when you talk about Georgette Heyer. So, but I think there's another saying I like, which is that art should disturb the comforted and comfort the disturbed. I mean, I think reading does all of it. Sometimes I look to reading for stretch and challenge, and sometimes I just want reading to get me through this awful day on this planet so I can continue doing my job, raising my child, and not checking out. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you know, what's wrong with making people laugh and making them feel engaged with the work, you know, just making them enjoy themselves. So that's what I would say.
For escape, read, be absorbed, or displacement. Yeah, exactly.
Can I just put in a word for Patrick O'Brian? He's terribly funny. Terribly funny.
I'm sure he is. It's blokes on ships, and I can't, you know, I don't, you know.
I read him when I wanted to write a historical novel, and I couldn't be bothered to do the research. I just thought I'd borrow his. And I got hooked on the novels and never wrote the historical fiction set on a boat.
I guess you try him again.
Well, only if you're desperate, obviously. It's not like we don't have enough to read. But like Georgette Heyer, his dialogue is terribly, terribly good.
Let's look at the packaging then I mean, I wonder how much the cover tells you what to think about the novel as well. So is Patrick O'Brian's packaging is more masculine? Possibly, I don't know. I'm putting it out there as I mean, it doesn't have people in pretty dresses on it necessarily, does it? So I don't know. Does that immediately define sort of, you know, does that allow people to sneer? I don't know. I'm just asking.
But there's also nothing wrong with pretty dresses, is there? Again, probably not.
Absolutely not.
It's not the number one reason I like her, but all that really sort of detailed stuff about clothes. But again, she does it in such an interesting way, because I'm not interested in fashion or clothes at all, but because when she writes about fashion and clothes, because she's telling you other things about, you know, the color of the reticule or the half chemise or whatever, as you see, I can't even remember the words, but it's telling you stuff about the characters and the way they interact with each other
and the social differences.
The social differences in the world.
Clothing is a social language. Yes.
There's a really interesting bit. I started rereading Arabella yesterday. Sorry, Lois. And her mother, turns out, has been putting a nest egg away to send Arabella to London. And Arabella isn't one of my favourites because she is a bit too pert ingenue for me. But her mother's been putting this nest egg away. They have no money. And she says, Mother, why have you done this? You know, you should have spent the money on a new carpet or whatever. And her mother says, in a very cool way, I regard this as a good investment. You know, I've saved up this money because I have 4 daughters. And if I send the really pretty oldest one off to London, it's not la, 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 la. You know, this is investing. Her mother is a sensible woman.
Yes, Mrs. Bennet, really, isn't it?
Well, more successful than Mrs. Bennet in a way. Yeah, poor Mrs. Bennet. As time goes on, I really warm to that woman.
Okay, so coming back to then Heyer's writing, I mean, is she pretty device-driven, villain to hero, plucky heroine, convenient brother or other, major misunderstanding, love and happiness, you know, always prevail, all with the backdrop of I think we're all agreed, meticulous historic detail and fabulous dialogue. But as writers, do your blank sheets of paper have any such apparent formula noted on them prior to starting a new novel? Or am I slightly underselling storytelling, writing and Heyer? Just shout me down.
Yes, there are a few things I like to have in a novel, but sometimes the story doesn't allow for that. I love to have a friend, so my heroine can tell her friend stuff, so she doesn't have to tell the reader stuff that the reader needs to know. But if the heroine doesn't have a friend, I have to manage without. And as for Georgette Heyer having all those devices, yes, she does. But do we care? No, we just want to just go along for the ride. Even if the characters, you know, can be similar, the aunts and things can be similar, we don't actually give a damn. We just read the book and enjoy it.
And Lady Jersey appears in them all, I think. So, yes.
I know, yes.
So how about those other blank sheets of paper? Cathy, you've just written your first novel. How
yeah, well, I mean, having finally managed to write a novel at the age of 48, I mean, I just feel like I am an ingenue in this setup, so I'm almost not sure I would dream to make any grand claims about my own process yet. I just feel very glad I've managed to do one. I think the thing with Heyer is she's continually refining / playing / kind of undercutting herself in a playful way. So some of the novels sort of poke fun at some, you know, so you kind of think, well, like Cotillion. So you think that you expect the hero to be one particular type of person and it's another type of person. So the sort of the idiot friend of one novel becomes a type who gets explored as the hero in another novel. Likewise with the heroine, quite often the heroine is the unlikely character, like in The Quiet Gentleman. It's the unusual, you know, she doesn't really appear like a heroine. So there's all sorts of playful meta stuff that she's up to, I think. And I think that's why, I mean, I'm always wanting to just read the whole lot in publication order. So, because I feel really interested in tracking sort of the development of her thought. And I like the older ones, even though, again, as they get late, some of them do. There's three that I really like, but I do confuse them because they're quite similar and they're all set in Bath and they've all got an older heroine and stuff. But they're all very good, and there are types that rebound, but they're all I only ever really want to read more of her types, I think. So yeah, I'm just there for it, all of it. I'll just have more of it, please.
I ran across
to reread them and to do it in chronological order. Lois, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say I ran across a discussion of Heyer which divided her heroes into sort of type A and type B. The type A being the alpha male hero who was, you know, who had the younger ingenue bride that she wrote when she was younger, and the type B hero of which Freddie is the quintessential example from Cotillion, the fellow who can, you know, procure you a chair in the rain.
Useful fellow.
But I'm thinking about that. I felt that the type A is the kind of hero you wanted when you were a girl, and the type B is the kind of hero you would want for your daughter when you're grown.
That's very nice. It's growing up with Heyer, isn't it, as well? Yes.
She does.
Yeah. Shall we hear from Regency Bath as well? What do you think, Harriet? You're saying you're there in Bath, are you?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
What, the process or the...
Yes, but I mean, you've 11 novels under your belt and you've sat on the other side of the desk. when they
I'm fascinated by her productivity and how sort of she took it really seriously, and she also was kind of really obsessed with, you know, tax problems and things like that, and kind of her office and it was quite mechanical for her, and that's why it's so funny that the books are so effortless. And I think it shows that thing. It's like the swan, my old boss used to say, you know, the kind of swan effect, that I think she worked super hard to make them seem effortless, because when it's like Mozart, you know, it's like Mozart. When you're writing something actually quite complicated and it has to look really light, that's really tricky. And I'm not good at very plotty, plotting out, but I'm also not good at just flying by the seat of my pants. So I'm somewhere in between, and that's quite difficult, because I do sometimes feel, oh God, you're making it much harder than it needs to be. That's what I admire about her so much. I think her work ethic was extraordinary. A book a year, every year, you know, working super hard, you know.
First published at 17. I mean, that's absolutely phenomenal, really. Yeah.
And you can see why maybe she started, like, I reread Lady of Quality last year when I moved to Bath, and Lady of Quality is like one of her last books, and you can see it's a bit creaky. It is very like, Lois, maybe you were saying this is a bit like Black Sheep, which I think is better. And you can feel it's a bit, you know, maybe some years, my agent and I were talking about this morning, you know, authors don't always write better books. Sometimes they do write better books than the last ones. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's way better. You know, it's not, otherwise we'd all end up as Shakespeare by a natural progression. You read that many books.
Each book cannot be better than all the others. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. But I'm fascinated by her because she gave away so little of herself. And that's, so you don't quite know what the process, you don't know what the process is. There's no like Insta quotes from Georgette Heyer of, you know, today guys, I'm dreaming of this, sort of, you know, she was.
But I think she did struggle with her plots, didn't she? She describes playing patience time after time after time, working out the plots, which is what I do a lot, I have to say. It's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. Because if Georgette Heyer did it, it's fine for me to do it.
What, you play patience on the computer, or you?
Yes, thinking about my plot, working stuff out. So the front part of my brain is occupied, which means my subconscious can sort of worry away at things.
Penny Vincenzi used to go for a long dog walk. She'd take a dog for a walk every morning, really long dog walk, and she'd be thinking about, well, I'm outside, I'm this and that, and she wouldn't think about it, just sort of in the back of her head, she'd be thinking about it. It's sort of front brain, back brain, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a walk will also do it, but it means getting dressed and, you know.
That's a pain.
Walks are very good for the process. I think pumps more blood up into your brain and you maybe have more function.
Yeah.
Well, like, I mean, we're very much now into your writing careers. Everyone around this virtual table is a bestseller, but could you actually say that Heyer actually had any influence on your style, your desire to write?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. She affected my writing style, my essays when I was at school, which I didn't really realise, because I wasn't obviously deliberately trying to write my essay about Julius Caesar in the style of, but I realised I did pick up her writing style, because I am one of those people who do pick up other people's writing styles. I mean, I don't worry about it, because you notice when you read it back instantly, it's not you. So it's not something that I think about a lot, but definitely, yeah, right from the beginning, before I was even thought about being a writer. And someone at my very first book signing said, do I detect an influence of Georgette Heyer? And I sort of said, well, she writes historical, mine are contemporary. But then I realised that's really nothing, you know, doesn't make any difference.
So it was completely unconscious, but she had inspired you to.
Yeah, but when somebody pointed it out to me, I realised, oh yes, you know, well, who am I kidding? Of course.
How about others, Lois?
Oh gosh, you know, the language and the world building, you know, leak in. Writers pick up language like lint. You know, it comes from everything, but certainly that. Her slightly archaic style leaks into my fantasy when I want to give a sense of, you know, not contemporary. Probably the most directly inspired by her work is a novel of mine called The Civil Campaign, which was explicitly a Regency romance in space, which would be much too long to describe the setup. It actually is the second half of a duology. The first one is Kamar, and it's romantic suspense. So I was playing with the romance, crossing romance and science fiction, which is tricky because because science fiction tends to be a very anti-domestic genre. I guess it's the broadest way of putting it. So trying to add that back in is an interesting process.
In the book that we're celebrating today, in this conference, there's an entire essay by Kathleen Jennings on the influence of Heyer on science fiction writing, which I think is quite interesting. not one that would necessarily have been obvious. But how about you two other ladies, Cathy and Harriet? What about direct influence or subconscious influence? Or
Not like a sort of fluency, this idea that, you know, but also very expressly female worlds are just interesting to write about, and that's okay. You know, when you grow up and you're sort of a bit, you know, everything's like all male football teams, or you know, or a lot of the films I saw, people were like, oh, Princess Leia, and I'd think, but she's the one girl. I just want somewhere where there's, you know, and I went to an all-girls school, and that was confusing when reflected in real life. So I've never thought about it before, actually. I think just that idea that, you know, it's a lot of the stuff is, you know, it's just a world where women are doing their thing, as I am as a woman going around doing my thing. So I think that just that confidence, just write about this world, and as Katie and Lois both said, that sort of world building, that complete, my books, I wish they were, you know, but the one thing I do really try hard to get with them is a total world having been built, so you feel you're entering into it if you buy one of my books. Yeah, she's very good at that.
She is extremely good, isn't she? You are there, aren't you? It's watching somebody step out of a carriage. You are, yeah, those nicely turned ankles. Cathy, how about you?
Yeah, I've not thought about it before, and I would have said no, but thinking about it now, I'm not sure the answer isn't like completely.
It's one of those.
I'd utterly forgotten about this, but I just remembered that in the novel I was writing years ago, which I didn't finish, which was I was writing at university, but there was a character in that who knew someone called Ancilla, and then met her brother who was called Aubrey, and then at some point twigged that this was because their mother was a big reader of Georgette Heyer, and I'd completely forgotten about that, but it just came to me then. I suppose probably, if one of the things I think she's so good at is I do think she's really good at the old show don't tell, you know, and she's also very good at annoying characters.
Which characters?
Annoying people.
Oh,
I think
yes.
incredibly good at annoying people, but again, without laying it on with a trowel. So I'm thinking of Edward Yardley in Venetia. It's the literary example of mansplaining I think there is. I just give him to you. Cousin Maria, who I think is in Lady of Quality, but as I say, I get those later Bath ones a bit muddled. But Cousin Maria, again, what an absolute triumph of putting a sort of a repressed, silly person on the page. It's just brilliant. So probably in that thing of, I hope, I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't almost want to say that I could do it, but there might be something in the way that I'm trying to put sort of human folly and vanity on the page, but not in a cruel way, and not in laying it on with a trowel, but just letting it sort of breathe. I don't know, I wouldn't say I've achieved it, but thinking about it, that I might be trying to do that because of Heyer. That might be something that's in my mind. And also the way she confounds you, as in you think a character's going to be this, and actually it turns out that they're not what you were expecting. That also might be, you know, which I also have tried to do in my novel, to the point where I wonder whether people might, after 2 chapters, throw it across the room and think like, oh, I don't want to spend time with these people who are all this, this and this. And I might say like, oh, but by chapter 10, you might find out that they're that. You know, attention spans are short. I don't worry about it. I've done my bit.
I shall remember that in the reader notes for when I buy your novel.
Because there is one, isn't there, where I think it's I can't remember what it's called, but the one where he marries this girl who's very rich, and her father's a cit. Oh, the shame.
Oh,
Civil contract.
Thank you.
Civil contract.
Wonderful book.
There's a Max Ravenscar-ish, lowering saturnine figure who's a dud, a total dud. Yeah. And I love that because he arrives and you think, oh, it's going to be him. Phew, right, okay, he's here. And then you keep thinking, no, she does make you do the work. You realise it and keep thinking, oh no. And that's, it again, is made to look so easy, but oh, it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard.
Well, anything that looks so easy is always somebody who's got complete mastery of their craft, I suppose. Yeah. Bridgerton. Now, I didn't really want to mention Bridgerton, and I don't want to linger, but I do think it does beg the question: is it the nearest that we're going to get to contemporary Heyer on the screen, or is it do we hope, paving the way for these wonderful novels that we can't decide actually which is our favourite going to appear. I mean, Katie, I think you mentioned that there possibly were a couple of dramatisations a long time ago.
Yes, The Tollgate many years ago, and was dramatised, and I think it was certainly on the radio, but I think it may have been a film as well. But to be honest, if you're not getting the dialogue and the wonderful characterisation and the writing, which you're not really in a film, you're not left with an awful lot, because let's face it, plotting isn't absolutely what she does best. You love it for the people, you love it for the dialogue and the quality of the writing and the jokes, but is it the plot? I don't think it is. Am I going to now be physically shocked? Maybe it's as well we're not all together and you can't throw things at me.
I never thought that before, but maybe you're right that the plots aren't, but she's got control of the plot though.
Oh yes, complete control. But it's not, you're not sort of turning, it's not like one of those books when you read it because you have to know what happens and then you throw it aside and said, well, that's absolute rubbish. And you don't pick up that author until you're next on a plane.
You're right.
Certainly. I mean, she's much more, it is more about quality than width, I think, with her.
Have the others, I mean, are we all, Bridgerton I watched my first Bridgerton last night for purposes of this panel because I thought everybody would have watched it. But it
treat in store.
Yeah, all right, you haven't, you have watched it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. I haven't got to the apparently the raunchier ones yet. But I was fascinated, and I was just fascinated with the narration, because for me it was sort of central casting Heyer in the way that it was narrated in the script and everything. And so to your point, in a way, Katie, it was, you need the narration device was kind of needed in Bridgerton to give you what was really going on. Otherwise it wasn't enough. I don't know. Is that,
I think
you watched one.
I think what works about Bridgerton is an American saw it as a slice of quite extraordinary life to her. It's totally otherworldly to her. Well, Shonda Rhimes, I mean, and she didn't, I think she developed it, but but it's her production company. So she said, let's take this. Well, God, it's extraordinary. Look at this, like a spaceship or like a, it's not. And that is why it feels so fresh. And that's why, the colours are very vivid. The music is, adaptations of pop songs. And I think if it had been done in Britain, and I think this is why a lot of Georgette Heyer adaptations, I understand from talking to production, people who work in production companies, whatever, when you say, why the hell has this never happened, is I think it's that it's all a bit tepid and British, and we make it, and Bridgerton works as it's adapted by people who know how to make, she made Grey's Anatomy, it's just, incredibly addictive TV, but B, it's this is extraordinary, this world, and she makes it look new and fresh. And you have to remember, the Regency is not like, as we all know, I mean, you all know this, but it's not like Victorian, Georgian times, everything was new, Bath, living in Bath, it was not this heritage thing that it's become now. It's a really exciting, new, bold city. And I think that's why the TV adaptation got greenlighted. And that's why, for me, when you look at it, you're like, oh, they see it as something new and extraordinary. And I don't think we'd be able to do it in the same way. I think we could maybe now. That's why I think Georgette Heyer hasn't worked.
Because the costumes are so deliberate, aren't they? I mean, they're so almost sort of shouting synthetic fibres.
And all the families have different colours. So the Featherstones all wear green, and the Bridgertons all wear, it's really cleverly done, but it's treated like a slice of, whereas we go, oh, it's like our,
We'd be truer to it, I guess. What about you, Lois?
Speaking from the American side, Heyer is very much like reading science fiction, because the world is totally alien, coming at it as a 20-year-old in the Midwest. It was all very mysterious. I think I used the same reading protocols I would use for reading about Bradbury's Mars. Let the strange words just sort of wash over me and follow along and let the story show me what it is. But yeah, it was an alien world for me.
Mm. And Cathy, have you views on dramatizations?
No, I haven't. I mean, I don't watch much telly, to be honest, mainly for the reasons that Katie said about hair not working so much. I just always rather watch, I would rather read books. I find it so much more satisfying to read books. Sometimes people think I think I'm morally superior because of that. It's not that at all. It's just somehow it suits my brain better. So I'm one of the few people in the world that doesn't have a view about it. And again, I kind of wouldn't, I love Georgette Heyer, but again, because I'm not that interested, I don't really care so much about whether or not it gets made into something. Though I'm sure the clothes would be fun. People like, the world she creates. I'm sure that you people that like those things on your strange planet of television watching might enjoy it.
But if it was bad, it would be the worst, wouldn't it?
It'd be nice for the next generation as well, though. Next gen Georgette Heyer, I think, is something that we all need to promote.
Said that though, I do think you'd miss the subtlety of it. So I do think maybe Georgette Heyer on the telly would just be. I never feel I should even say this. Not really liking telly film. I never feel Jane Austen really. I mean, like dramatizations of Jane Austen, always really good ones. It's just eye candy, isn't it? Because you don't. Without the language, it's just like, oh, this pretty woman likes that handsome man, but he likes that other one, and what's happening next? Yeah. Again, maybe that's why the eye candy for me just never makes up for all the subtlety that you miss.
For me, it's the houses. Yeah, I'm always looking at the houses and think, oh, that's a lovely house. Oh, that's a lovely house.
Yeah, which is nice, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing wrong with pictures of nice houses. Maybe I will give Bridge to go.
Nice gardens in the episode I saw last night as well. Okay, well, I think we are getting towards the end, so I'm going to just ask, I mean, Heyer was notoriously private. I think she might have been perceived to have been slightly, slightly rude about her fans on occasion, but she was a phenomenal bestseller. But how do you think she would have reacted to influencers, etc.? So as you guys were authors writing the 22nd century, what does the 24/7 opportunity for publicity give you, and how much does it pressure you, really?
It's me, the horrors. One of the first things I retired from when I semi-retired was public speaking, and the convention circuit and book tours and all this kind of thing. It's really, I can stay home and write and just have the good parts version of my career. So I'm kind of a 21st century dropout in that sense.
Did you not enjoy it?
Which?
The getting up and speaking, the public
speaking. Oh no, not at all.
About meeting your readers.
That's kind of fun, although I can do that online, as they write fan mail or they write reviews. I can kind of see what they're thinking. So I don't miss the readers. I'm not losing the contact. In fact, prior to the internet, the only way you ever had contact or feedback with readers was with personal meetings, book tours or conventions. So that nourishment has been taken over by the internet.
Well, Katie, you must have seen quite a difference since you were first published and now, as to how much pressure there might be out there in terms of interaction.
I don't interact as much as I used to. I used to go on terrific book tours with Charlotte Bush, and we used to have such fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was. And we don't do that now, partly because it's so fantastically expensive, and possibly I'm a bit better known, so I don't have to do that quite so much. And of course, since lockdown, we're not doing it at all. And I did a library event online yesterday, and it was lovely to get the questions, but it's not the same as seeing the people. It's not the same when people come up to you, the mother and daughter or the sisters, and say, we will share your book, and then we want to read it, and then the other, and all that lovely personal thing that makes you think, oh gosh, real people read my books. How about that? Because sales figures, that doesn't relate to people. I just, unless you see people reading your book, which so far I never have, I don't believe they do. So it's really nice to meet people and say, oh no, look, I really do. Look, I've got it. And so I do miss that, really. Although it does save me so much time and energy not doing that.
I think you should hold up the book that was published this week, Katie.
Oh, all right, I will, because I've got it handy. So there we are. So I could, and I'm now officially a historical novelist because it's set in the 60s. So
I mean, that depresses me somewhat, and my daughter always refers to it as vintage times. I was born in the 60s, but now it's historical novelist.
yes, I don't know which is better, historical or vintage.
I think vintage is a nice euphemism. How about you, Harriet?
My 9-year-old asked me if I was born in the Second World War yesterday. Oh, how long will half term go on for? This is just unbearable.
That's cheered me up.
I struggle with it because I used to work in publishing and I really miss the office. I really miss talking about books. I really miss just how I'm quite an enthusiast. So I miss being enthusiastic about things and building consensus and, and writing is like being in lockdown, it's just you're always on your own and everything. But I also really, really like being on my own. When I did that Myers-Briggs personality test, I was like right in the middle between introvert and extrovert. So I love the library tours. I need to do them. I love the random people who come along, one of whom might have read your book, the other people who are just sheltering from the rain, that kind of thing. But I dislike the way I've started to pass out pieces of my life to see if they can go on social media. I find that really tiresome, and I enjoy connecting with the readers on the Facebook page. That's just actually a dialogue, and the rest of it, I've left Twitter now. I might have to go back on it, but I just found it Katie does it really well. I wasn't able to, I just got too wound up all the time. And more, I think she never gave interviews. She never said, yes, please come to my house. And, I quite like that. I'd love someone to come to my house and tidy up for me. But, she just was much more like, no, I don't want to do that. I like that feeling that she was quite sure of herself,
Yes. Yeah. Cathy, is it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm a raging extrovert. So the most difficult bit about writing for me is just having to be alone. Mm-hmm. And I realised lately, this is how much of an extrovert I am. I would almost rather be with someone I dislike than be It's crazy, isn't it? But it's true. I struggle so much with being alone, and I know most writers aren't like this, but for me, the public stuff, like, that's the prize. That's why I do it. The reason I write is so I can then talk about writing, because I love talking about writing. I love talking about it with other writers, and I love talking about it with readers. I love readers who want to become writers. Again, loads of writers don't really like that category of people. I adore them. I immediately want to sit them down and get a pen in their hand and start giving them exercises. I love all of that. It's not that it isn't sometimes bruising and exposing and tricky. It's not that it's not quite as straightforward as that. But what I would say is the real life bit of it, without the internet, I think I would be really sociable writer and really, really happy. I must say the online bit for me feels really different. So again, I find Twitter, I think we're just developing, we're still working it out. I find them really addictive. Also, I think actually actively depressing. I have to be really careful. I have to monitor my own input. I have to monitor myself with them really carefully and do very little. So that's hard. So I think so it's interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting that Lois doesn't want to do the real life stuff, but she can meet her readers online. Whereas I would sign up non-stop for as much real life as you can throw at me, but feel I don't really like, the Twitter chat. It's that idea of something you say, in an unguarded moment, you say something that's not fully thought through, and then somebody tweets it out of context, and the idea that becomes something it wasn't. I find that all really scary. I also love the company of other writers. Of course, Georgette Heyer called other writers inkies and was quite dismissive about them. Whereas I'm not just saying it because these ladies are here, but one of my finest memories was a Pizza Express lunch I had with Harriet after we'd been at an event together. And I was in the audience in the late 90s when Katie talked about being a writer, long, whilst I was still like, dare I, can I, could I ever? And it was so sustaining and wonderful. And again, just that thing, she treated us like we were real people, and that's sort of what I carry on from that. So there's huge there's huge sort of privilege and joy for me in that, being out in the world with the work. And I can't really imagine, so I don't get why, when I think about Georgette Heyer, like the point of being so productive for me would have been that I could then go out to a party and talk about it.
Yeah.
And not have to do horrible, boring work with spreadsheets. You know, it's, for me, it's like, if I work really hard at that, then I don't have to do that horrible job. And I get to talk about it with nice people who I will like and find emotionally sustaining.
Mm.
Very funny with Georgette Heyer, isn't it? It's almost as though she was ashamed of her craft and her art, or I don't know. What do you? Or was she just deeply private and had two parts to her life? One was writing and one was being Mrs. Rouget.
And maybe
I had some scorching reviews when she was young that, you know, traumatized her.
Yeah.
And that thing like Elizabeth Taylor, you know, she didn't write her. She didn't like, you know, giving herself away. She kept herself very private. She, you know, had a completely different home life to her writing life. Maybe it's something you don't expect of a man who writes a book, or, you know, I don't know. I don't know why I expect her to sort of match her brand a bit more, but I think it is, maybe it's not my business to expect her to sit with a live recreation of the Royal Crescent next to her at all times, you know.
It's what we want rather than what she wants, and we're sort of saying, well, she was odd because she didn't. And
yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, I'm afraid that it comes to the last question. It's a rather frivolous one, but there are lots of descriptions of gin and for gin in Heyer novels, etc. And there seems to be a plethora. I don't like gin, but there seems to be a plethora in current times of lots of different gin brands. Surely it's time for a Heyer gin. I mean, it might be time now for a Heyer gin. But there doesn't appear to be a Heyer gin.
Good morning, no.
Do we think there's a market for it?
The only thing I would say is that I think gin was drunk rather by the lower orders.
Yes.
And I don't think she should have anything remotely lower orders about
Ratafia. Yes.
Although that was rather sweet. So I think a fine Madeira myself.
Fine Madeira.
Yeah.
There, my dear.
Yeah. I don't, yeah, she wouldn't, that's like Gin Lane. She wouldn't have wanted to.
No. So we think Madeira, do we?
Isn't it? Leaky Peg brings Arabella's brother the gin to drink, doesn't she, I think?
Yes.
Or ratafia, which I've never been able to find out what it was.
No, I don't think.
Yeah, I looked it up at one point, Lois, and I did find out apparently that it's sort of basically a fruit brandy.
Ah. Well, maybe would that be acceptable, or have we all agreed on Madeira?
No, we didn't have a fruit brandy. Well, I suppose Calvados is a fruit brandy.
Calvados,
Yeah.
yes.
But it's still quite strong liquor.
Yes, I think Heyer was probably more of a Madeira woman, actually.
Yeah.
I think.
You can wonder,
Sherry.
Regency
Probably
characters
dry
spent
sherry.
half their time sozzled, but
Yes.
accounts for some of their activities.
Yeah.
Maybe I think it's Madeira o'clock. Thank you very much indeed. That was enormous fun. Thank you for all being Heyer fans, and thank you for giving